A single whisper in the hallway of Clarence House shattered months of carefully crafted silence. At first it was dismissed, a rogue aide overhearing something they shouldn't have. But when a confidential document reached the king's private secretary by dawn, Buckingham Palace went on immediate lockdown. The Queen Consort had allegedly rewritten royal protocol and done so without the monarch's knowledge. The monarchy's most sacred rules were no longer safe, and neither was Camilla's position. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It started with a misfiled memo, one that should have gone through the Lord Chamberlain's office, but instead bypassed all traditional channels. The language in the document was subtle, the edits so precise that only a seasoned constitutional expert would have noticed. But someone did. A loyal advisor with a long memory and a quiet loyalty to the late Queen flagged it. What followed was a chain reaction inside the palace corridors. That same document was quietly hand-delivered to the king's most trusted secretary, who brought it directly to Charles without informing the Queen Consort's team. By breakfast, Clarence House was under informal lockdown. Doors were shut, phones stopped ringing. Even the palace guards sensed something was off. Charles was no stranger to court intrigue, but this betrayal, if true, had crossed into sacred ground. Altering protocol wasn't simply an administrative misstep. It was a breach of the Crown's unspoken code of trust. The edits Camilla had allegedly authorized shifted influence in ways that appeared almost surgical, ones that could demote Catherine in precedence, reassign ceremonial powers, and grant discretionary access to individuals loyal to Camilla's side of the family. It was no longer about titles, it was about control. Staff close to the Queen Consort began to retreat into silence. Whispers turned into avoidance. Meetings were cancelled without notice. The royal aides loyal to the king tiptoed around the Queen's team, who now seemed defensive and visibly distressed. It became clear that more than one person knew about the changes, yet no one dared speak openly. The air in the palace grew colder, not physically but emotionally. Suspicion seeped into the hallways. Was this a solo act of ambition, or part of a coordinated power grab designed to secure Camilla's future influence, especially with Catherine's rising visibility and public adoration? Charles, wounded but composed, summoned only his most senior advisors, those who had stood with him during the darkest days of the Crown's transition. No one else was to be informed. Not William, not Anne, not even Camilla herself, not yet. And so, while the public watched a smiling royal family wave from balconies, pose for cameras and attend state banquets as if all was normal, behind those golden walls, a storm brewed in silence. Charles's trust had been shaken to its core, but he needed more than instinct. He needed proof. And proof was exactly what the coming days would unveil: documents, testimony, and a betrayal so layered it would leave the monarchy forever altered. But what exactly did Camilla change? And how deep did the deception run? The king would soon uncover a trail far darker than expected. Hidden beneath layers of ceremonial jargon and dusty traditions were line edits. Edits that hadn't been seen by the sovereign himself. Protocols governing royal succession communications, ceremonial seating orders, and even palace security access codes had been subtly modified. And every single change traced back to one woman, Camilla. As investigators combed through the mountain of royal documentation, one folder stood out, not for what it contained, but for what it no longer did. Missing authorizations unsigned by His Majesty, yet already marked as active protocol. Legal counsel, called in under the guise of estate restructuring, quickly realized that the changes bore the fingerprints of internal tampering. The subtle rewordings seemed harmless at first, an altered phrase here, a title switch there, but when compiled and chronologically matched, the revisions painted a different picture entirely. These weren't clerical improvements or outdated clause removals, they were quiet power shifts. And more tellingly, they benefited only one senior figure, the Queen Consort. Among the most damning alterations was a clause regarding the order of royal precedence at future coronations and state ceremonies. It suggested Catherine would not walk alongside her husband but behind Camilla, regardless of future titles. This deviation, though masked under ceremonial logistics, had never been reviewed by Charles nor discussed with the Privy Council. Another clause regarding future emergency sessions of the Clarion Council, one of the monarchy's most critical internal groups, removed Princess Anne from the chain of priority altogether, replacing her with an unnamed senior female royal. The implications were chilling, especially considering Anne's lifelong service to the crown and her formidable role as an institutional anchor. These weren't clerical edits, they were strategic cuts. The deeper they dug, the more threads unraveled. Internal communications between Camilla's private office and lesser-known aides revealed a series of hastily approved memos, bypassing traditional vetting routes. At least 3 documents bore electronic tracking logs, showing they were opened and modified within Camilla's wing, but without Charles's counter-signature or his private secretary's knowledge. One particularly sensitive document contained Jane restricted security access for high-profile state guests was found to have been modified during a late evening in March, hours after a royal dinner Camilla had attended alone. Cyber forensics confirmed the revision originated from an internal device linked to her closest aide. Was this raw ambition a calculated strategy to preserve Camilla's status in an ever-evolving royal hierarchy, or was it desperation? A silent battle to protect a legacy she feared was slipping away. The palace was divided. Those loyal to the Queen Consort argued she had merely tried to streamline outdated procedures in light of her increasing duties. But those loyal to the King, and more notably to the late Queen Elizabeth's vision, saw something else entirely, an attempted rearrangement of royal power through administrative disguise. Yet Camilla never signed a single document herself. That task fell to her private secretary, a seasoned, discreet figure, long known for tight-lipped efficiency. But as the scrutiny intensified, the paper trail no longer protected him. Every edit, every bypass, every timestamp pulled the curtain back on what appeared to be a quiet but deliberate campaign, one that could only have functioned with his full participation and her implicit approval. But as the ink dried on this betrayal, the question became not just what was altered, but who else knew, and who helped cover it up. He didn't mean to reveal it, not like this. But under intense questioning by the king's investigators, one of Camilla's senior aides broke down in tears, revealing weeks of coordinated meetings, late-night directives, and a chilling statement from Camilla herself. "If I don't protect my place now, they will erase me." The confession came after hours of calculated pressure. Initially calm, the aide repeated the same phrases. "I was following standard protocol. These were minor updates, nothing." Was signed without clearance. But the mask cracked when confronted with hard digital evidence, timestamps, server access logs, internal memos, forwarded between restricted email threads. It was no longer deniable. The aide admitted that Camilla had personally instructed him to greenlight changes, sidestep Charles's signature, and reroute communications to bypass specific individuals, most notably the king's legal advisors. With his hands trembling, he revealed the true reason: fear. Fear that Catherine's growing popularity, elegance, and innate connection with the public would eventually push Camilla into irrelevance. It wasn't just fear of losing status, it was fear of being written out of history. As he spoke, a different kind of panic unfolded beyond the interrogation room. The royal household, normally a fortress of routine and discretion, was now divided into unspoken camps. Some staff quietly supported Camilla, convinced she had acted in defense of her position as Queen Consort, shielding herself from what they believed to be Catherine's orchestrated rise. Others, particularly those who had served under Queen Elizabeth, were incensed. To them, Camilla's actions were a desecration of sacred tradition. Lines were drawn, loyalty whispered in hallways and exchanged in glances across state rooms. The atmosphere turned cold. Familiar corridors became zones of suspicion. And still, Catherine remained publicly silent. The Princess of Wales neither commented nor made changes to her public schedule. But something had shifted in how others responded to her presence. During an engagement that same week, a subtle but unmistakable detail emerged when Catherine entered the reception. A high-ranking advisor, formally aligned with Camilla, stood and bowed. The press didn't report it, the palace didn't explain it, but those watching knew power had started to shift. Behind the scenes, Her supporters, Lady Sarah, the Duke of Kent, and even senior aides in the royal archives began voicing concern about what else might have been tampered with. Meanwhile, King Charles, torn between the roles of monarch and husband, felt the weight of the crown press harder than ever. The betrayal was no longer speculation, it was confession. And yet it wasn't just about documents or meetings, it was about intent. Camilla had not only acted without authorization, she had acted with forethought, with strategy, and with fear that she was already losing. The very foundation of royal unity had cracked, not from external scandal, but from the shadows within. With betrayal now undeniable, King Charles was left with a crushing choice: confront the woman he once called his anchor, or risk the monarchy's collapse from within. The door shut behind them. No advisors, no aides. Just Charles and Camilla in a room thick with tension and truth. For the first time in years, the king's voice didn't tremble, it thundered. What began as questioning turned into confrontation. What she said in return left him staring in silence, shattered. Charles had waited for the reports to be verified, for the evidence to be indisputable, for his fury to cool. But the moment Camilla entered the room, the weight of weeks of deception unleashed itself in a single, shattering statement. "You altered what was sacred." She recoiled, stunned not by the words, but by the pain in his voice. He accused her not only of bypassing him, but of breaching the invisible covenant between them, one built not just on marriage, but on monarchy. She responded with deflection at first, claiming the changes had been minor, that aides had misunderstood instructions, that she had only tried to modernize tradition. But as Charles pressed harder, revealing names, dates, and documents she never expected him to see, her composure gave way. With a voice barely above a whisper, Camilla said what no one outside that room would hear for days: "They are pushing me out. I see it in their eyes, in their silence. If I don't fight for my place, they'll erase me." The words landed not as an excuse but as a confession, a glimpse into her fear, her vulnerability, her quiet war against becoming invisible again. And in that moment, what had begun as betrayal was revealed to be something even more corrosive: desperation. Yet for Charles, that revelation didn't soothe, it stung deeper. His gaze turned cold. "You're not above the crown," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You're bound to it." Camilla's eyes welled. Not in performative sadness, but in fury, in humiliation, in a silent scream for understanding that would never come. She tried to explain how public perception had always seen her as secondary, how whispers about Catherine's growing influence made her feel cornered, how even the corridors she walked felt colder than before. But Charles, now unflinching, made it clear that protocol was never hers to wield. Her actions, intentional or not, had jeopardized more than his trust. They had endangered the very stability of the monarchy. And yet, no official sentence was passed that day, no decision declared. But the silence that followed between them said more than any royal proclamation could. By the end of that encounter, Camilla rose from her chair slowly, hands clasped to steady herself, crown figuratively intact, but something within her clearly fractured. She opened the door herself and walked past the waiting aides with a glance so sharp it silenced even the boldest whispers. The tension wasn't just between king and queen consort. Now it was threaded through the walls of every palace, every staff briefing, every silent exchange between royals. Everyone could feel it. Something had shifted, and still, no public word had been spoken. As the queen consort left that room with her crown intact, but shaking rumors began to swirl about what Charles might do next. It hadn't happened in decades. The full royal council, including Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and even outside legal advisors, was summoned under the veil of confidentiality. In the center of the table sat a draft decree, bold in tone, surgical in language. Its purpose? To formally reduce Camilla's authority within the crown's inner workings. The room was hushed, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. This was no ordinary gathering. The last time such a council had been convened without public notice was during the delicate transition after the Queen's passing. Now, the stakes were just as high, if not higher. Charles sat at the head, his expression unreadable, but the decree before him spoke volumes. It was a document designed not to humiliate but to restore order. Camilla's overreach had broken a silent contract within the royal structure, and now the monarchy had to defend itself. Princess Anne, who rarely speaks without purpose, was one of the first to weigh in. Her words were sharp but controlled. She did not speak from emotion but from principle. She called the breach a violation of trust and tradition and demanded an immediate reversal of the unauthorized changes. Her voice carried the authority of decades of service, and more than that, the unshakable loyalty she'd shown to both her mother's reign and her brother's. Prince Edward, ever the diplomat, urged caution in tone but not in action. Quiet dignity, he advised, but decisive correction. He backed the restructuring, though he warned that Camilla's dignity must be preserved for the public eye, if only to avoid destabilizing perception. William, however, was less restrained. Furious at the subtle undermining of Catherine's position, he repeatedly questioned how long these edits had been in play and who had turned a blind eye. His loyalty to his wife and the legacy of his late mother burned through every word. To him, this wasn't just a policy correction, it was justice. What Camilla had done wasn't merely procedural manipulation, it was a betrayal of hierarchy, honor, and perhaps most painfully, trust between generations. The council listened, and more than a few nodded. The decree, still in draft form, outlined a shift of ceremonial powers, many of which had slowly migrated into Camilla's purview back to the direct oversight of the monarch. More controversially, several of her honorary positions, particularly in charities closely associated with Queen Elizabeth, were now flagged for reassignment. The proposed plan was that these duties would either return to the monarch or be redistributed among working royals, including Catherine and Anne. Yet the thorniest issue remained: how public should the consequences be? Some argued for a quiet correction, a simple change in the court circular and royal website entries. Others believed silence would be interpreted as complicity. There was growing concern that the press already sensed a fracture, and once the media got wind of a potential demotion, the palace would be forced into defensive mode. No consensus was reached, but the undercurrent was clear. The will to act was unanimous. The only variable was execution. But while the council debated tact and tradition, King Charles had already made up his mind, and what came next would stun even his closest allies. There was no press release, no statement. But keen royal watchers noticed the change. In the court circular, the Queen Consort was suddenly referred to simply as HRH, the Duchess of Cornwall, in ceremonial listings. A legacy reversed, a title reshaped. And in silence, the public realized Camilla had been demoted. It began with a footnote. One few outside the palace understood, but that insiders immediately recognized. For years, every royal listing, ceremony program, and official document had referred to Camilla as Her Majesty the Queen Consort. But overnight, that designation disappeared from palace communications. Instead, the name that had once defined her years before, Duchess of Cornwall, quietly returned. The change was subtle but deliberate. It was not the removal of a person, but of power. Senior aides, when questioned by select press contacts, offered no comment. Internally, however, new email signatures, event templates, and guest briefings all followed suit. It was clear the shift wasn't symbolic, it was systemic. Camilla, upon learning of the adjustment, reportedly refused to attend a high-profile royal engagement. The event, hosted in Windsor, was expected to feature both the King and Queen Consort. When Charles arrived alone, the whispers began. Aides claimed illness. But palace insiders leaked a different story. That Camilla had privately protested, calling the change a betrayal dressed as tradition. Her office issued no denial. The silence from her team was louder than any denial could have been. The media, smelling smoke, pounced. "Where is the Queen Consort?" asked one headline. "Palace power shift." Read another. Commentators scrambled to explain the constitutional nuance, but the deeper truth couldn't be hidden behind royal protocol. There was no clerical adjustment. This was a punishment, one that played out not in courtrooms but in court listings. Social media erupted. Royal supporters and critics alike dissected the terminology, the silence, the timing. Some viewed the change as overdue, a correction to a role they believed was always inherited with discomfort. Others called it cruel, a public shaming masked in regal restraint. But while opinions clashed online, something else took center stage. On the same day Camilla refused her appearance, Catherine arrived at a separate state function alone, radiant and unmistakably positioned at the forefront. For the first time she was introduced without comparison, without being cast in Camilla's shadow. She stood not as a consort in waiting, but as the emerging matriarch of a new royal era. Inside the palace, the mood was eerie. The shift in styling marked more than just a title change. It signaled an ending, a quiet undoing of an identity Camilla had fought years to build. In a world where symbolism carries the weight of law, being stripped of queen consort without a formal statement was a sentence without trial. Charles did not revoke her completely, but he had redrawn the map, and in doing so, he had rewritten the power dynamic clearly, decisively, and without needing to utter a single word in public. But this wasn't just about protocol. It was about legacy, and Camilla wasn't going down without a final move of her own. In a move no one expected, Camilla launched a last-ditch effort to salvage her role not through the crown but through influence. A private letter, hand-delivered to Parliament. A media ally prepped for a sympathetic leak, and whispers that she had something else, a secret she never intended to use. The letter, written in her own hand, arrived not at the Prime Minister's office, but to a senior peer in the House of Lords, a man known for his discreet connections to the monarchy and his long-standing admiration of Camilla's resilience. It was a calculated choice. The contents were carefully worded, not overtly accusatory but suggestive, subtle, political. She did not question the king's right to restructure titles, but she did raise a legal ambiguity and echo of historical precedent, implying that the removal of a consort's formal designation without parliamentary recognition could be seen as an overreach. No signature from Charles was included in the administrative order, she noted. No formal royal proclamation had been issued, just a change in phrasing and a quiet erasure. Her intent was clear, so uncertainty. Not enough to overturn the decision, but enough to slow it down. At the same time, Camilla reached into her long-maintained network of media allies. One particular columnist, known for tactfully shaping public sympathy, was approached with an offer, an exclusive narrative from a source close to the Queen Consort, revealing her emotional turmoil, her years of sacrifice, and most crucially, a hidden journal entry that hinted at internal fractures in the royal household dating back long before Charles became king. The leak was strategic. The entry referenced a moment when Queen Elizabeth allegedly expressed concern that division between heirs and consorts may one day threaten the monarchy's unity. The context was vague. The implications were explosive. Speculation erupted across media outlets, social feeds, and royal analysis programs. Had Camilla merely defended herself, or was this the first step in a coordinated counterattack? Was the diary entry a veiled threat? Did she possess more letters, recordings, private conversations that could turn sympathy in her favour or force the king's hand? Parliament, though not publicly responding, held quiet discussions behind closed doors. And inside the palace, the mood turned from quiet punishment to full-scale damage control. Charles, deeply aware of the optics, said nothing. But those closest to him confirmed he was briefed in detail. The idea that Camilla would weaponize her access to both political and media institutions sent shockwaves through the palace's inner sanctum. To the public, it was all speculation. But to the monarchy, this was the clearest sign yet that Camilla was not stepping down quietly, she was playing a longer game. The institution had always been able to manage scandal from without, but this was from within, a fracture turning into a fissure, and now on the edge of becoming a firestorm. The palace refused to comment as it always had, but deep within Clarence House, a decision was being drafted, one that would not only answer Camilla's silent threat but shut the door on it permanently. Charles was no longer just defending a title, he was preparing to defend the crown itself. As the monarchy braced for reputational warfare, it became clear that the king's next action wouldn't just protect the throne, it would define it. On a cold Sunday morning, with press gathered and global eyes watching, King Charles stepped forward alone. No Camilla, no apology, just the sovereign declaring the restoration of royal order and the names of those who would now guide the monarchy forward. Camilla's name was nowhere on the list, The statement was brief, but its impact was seismic. Standing before the gathered dignitaries and cameras, Charles read from a parchment signed just hours earlier, a formal proclamation reconfiguring the royal order for the coming era. In a voice steeled by duty and pain, he named Princess Anne as senior state advisor, reinstating her ceremonial oversig. With full honours. Prince Edward would assume new responsibilities overseeing historic institutions and trust portfolios once linked to the Queen Consort. But it was the final name that sent shockwaves across the world. Catherine, Princess of Wales, appointed as principal representative of the Crown for domestic and Commonwealth affairs. A position never formally held by anyone not born a monarch or spouse to a reigning king. The announcement wasn't just administrative. It was symbolic, a public coronation of legacy in motion. What followed was not applause, but a stunned silence. Reporters scrambled for clarification, but the message was unambiguous. Camilla's name had not only been omitted, it had been erased. No mention of her title, no indication of honorary roles, no plans for upcoming engagements. The court circular confirmed it that afternoon. Going forward, Camilla would not participate in state functions, and her ceremonial duties had been redistributed. Overnight, royal calendars were updated, press invitations amended, and web pages revised to reflect the new order. Those who supported her cried foul. They called it brutal, cold, even calculated. But those who had long questioned her role saw it as the monarchy finally correcting course, reclaiming control after a dangerous veer into uncertainty. The absence of retaliation from Camilla's side only deepened the impact. Her media allies offered no fresh commentary. Parliament received no follow-up correspondence. It was as though her campaign had evaporated in the face of a sovereign's will. But the silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. Charles had made it clear. The monarchy was not a place for ambition cloaked in fear, nor influence built on fragile alliances. His words, measured yet final, carried centuries of weight. The crown must remain above the storm, even when the storm rises from within. In the days that followed, Catherine's presence filled the void, not with dominance, but with quiet, graceful assurance. Every gesture, every public duty, was now layered with new meaning. She wasn't stepping into Camilla's shoes, she was forging a different path entirely, one lit not by proximity to power, but by earned trust and unwavering respect. The monarchy didn't just survive this internal fracture, it evolved because of it. And the world, watching carefully, understood the message in full. The crown had chosen its future, and it had done so without compromise. But behind closed doors, the emotional cost of that decision would ripple through the family for generations. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.